You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The storm had a grudge against West 35th Street. It came in off the river like a big wet fist, slapped sleet against the brownstone windows, and made the iron railings sing a thin, unhappy tune. It was the kind of weather that persuades sensible people to stay home, drink something warm, and postpone their crimes until spring. Unfortunately, criminals are seldom sensible. At 8:15, Fritz opened the front door, and the wind tried to come in with the visitor. Fritz blocked it with the easy authority of a man who has been defending a civilized household for decades. The visitor nearly fell over the threshold anyway. He was big in the shoulders, soaked at the collar, and wearing a dark coat that had once been expensive, but was now just wet. His hat brim dripped. His eyes were the notable part, hard eyes that had been trained to notice everything, now wide with the kind of panic that makes a man forget his training. "I need Nero Wolfe," he said to Fritz, and his voice had the clipped, controlled tone of someone used to giving orders. It cracked on the last word. Fritz didn't ask why. Fritz almost never asks why. He simply glanced back toward the office, as if checking whether the house's owner was in the mood to accept the weather's gift. I was at my desk, pretending paperwork mattered. Wolfe was in his chair behind his desk, a bulky, immovable presence, looking as if the storm had been personally arranged to inconvenience him. He had already been inconvenienced today by the fact that time existed, so he was in a receptive state for additional irritations. I rose and stepped into the hall. "I'm Archie Goodwin. If you want to sell something, Fritz can tell you no in 3 languages. If you want to confess something, you need the police." The man's gaze snapped to me and held. "Museum," he said. "Security." That was enough to make it interesting. Museums don't come to Wolfe unless they want to keep something quiet that will become loud if it gets out. "Name?" I asked. "Boyd Halverson," he said. "Chief of Security for the Marlow Museum of Art." He said it as if I should salute. I didn't. I said, "Come in before you drown on the doormat." He stepped into the foyer, and Fritz relieved him of his hat and coat, with a smoothness that made Halverson's urgency look even more frantic. By contrast, Wolfe's voice came from the office, deep and annoyed. "Goodwin, who is it?" "A man who protects old paintings and feels he has failed at it." I called back. Halverson's mouth tightened, but he didn't waste breath on offense. He followed me into the office with the directness of someone who has memorized floor plans. His eyes flicked over Wolfe's desk. My desk, the chairs, the shelves, the framed prints, and finally landed on Wolfe himself with a mixture of relief and resentment. Wolfe did not offer his hand. Wolfe does not offer his hand to storms or to men who bring storms. "Mr. Halverson," Wolfe said, because Fritz had already murmured the name. "You are damp. Sit down, explain quickly." Halverson sat in the red leather chair as if it were a duty station. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. His hands were steady, which made his eyes more alarming. "One of our service doors was left unlocked," he said. Wolfe blinked once. "That is unfortunate. It is also not my concern." Halverson's jaw tightened. It wasn't overlooked. It was left that way. I watched Wolfe's eyelids lower slightly. That was his signal for. "Now we may be dealing with intent, which is always more interesting than incompetence," Wolfe said. "Service door at the museum." "Yes," Halverson replied. "Sooth loading entrance. Secure corridor, 2 locks. 1 mechanical, 1 electronic, alarmed logged. That door does not end up unlocked unless someone wants it unlocked." Wolfe's tone stayed flat. "And you came here because—" "Because," Halverson said, and for a moment his control slipped. "Simone expected chaos." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Elaborate." Halverson took a breath. "We have a private event tonight. Donors, board members. A new acquisition on display. One piece, highly insured. Very public. The storm is already cutting traffic and slowing police response. At 4:30 this afternoon, our south service door was found unsecured. Found by whom? Wolfe asked. By a roving guard doing a perimeter check, Halverson said. He reported the electronic lock had been disengaged and the mechanical bolt hadn't been thrown. I said, so the door was not forced. It was simply invited. Halverson's eyes flicked to me, exactly. Wolfe made a small sound that was not approval. But it was interest's cousin. You relocked it. We did, Halverson said. We ran diagnostics. The system log shows the lock was disabled at 4:12 p.m. and re-enabled at 4:24 p.m. 12 minutes, Wolfe murmured. Halverson nodded. 12 minutes with a storm outside and an event tonight. 12 minutes where anyone with the right timing could enter, stash something, plant something, map something, and walk away unnoticed because everyone assumes the alarm keeps the world honest. Wolfe's mouth tightened. You do not assume it. Yet someone does. Halverson's voice hardened. Someone wanted it, and whoever it was knew we'd blame a mistake. Wolfe leaned back a fraction, which is as close as he gets to leaning in. Why are you not speaking to the police? Halverson's eyes flicked toward the door, as if he could see the museum board waiting outside. Because the board will call it a malfunction, he said. Because donors are arriving in 3 hours. Because if the police show up at a gala, the word museum will be paired with the word security breach in every paper by morning. Wolfe's eyes went colder. So you came to me to preserve reputations. I came to you, Halverson corrected, to prevent violence. That earned him a point. Most men who claim to want prevention are actually shopping for discretion. Halverson looked like he wanted discretion too, but it was riding in the back seat behind something heavier. Wolfe said, Do you anticipate theft? Halverson hesitated. Possibly, but I'm not here because of the acquisition. Wolfe's eyebrows lifted a millimeter. Then why? Halverson reached into his inside pocket and produced a folded sheet of paper. He handed it to me, and I unfolded it. It was plain typing paper, no letterhead, no signature, 3 lines. The door will be your alibi. The storm will be your cover. If you want to keep your job, leave it unlocked again. I whistled softly. That's cheerful. Halverson's voice went tight. That was slid under my office door at noon. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Typed. Yes, Halverson said. Not printed, typed. Wolfe held out his hand. I gave him the paper. He examined it as if it were a specimen pinned to cork. He did not touch it more than necessary. Wolfe treats unknown paper the way he treats unknown people, politely, at a distance. You have a typewriter at the museum, Wolfe said. Several, Halverson replied. Wolfe's eyes remained on the note. And you have employees who know how to use them? Yes, Wolfe looked up. And you have employees who know what door logs record, what 12 minutes can accomplish, and how a storm affects response time. Halverson's jaw clenched. Yes. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Then your concern is internal. Halverson said nothing for a second. Then he nodded once. That's why I'm here. Wolfe set the note down on his blotter, as if he had placed a dead insect there. You said the door was found unlocked at 4:30. Yet the note was delivered at noon. That implies confidence. Halverson's eyes were hard. Or knowledge. Wolfe's lips curled faintly. Knowledge implies access. The person who typed this expected compliance, which suggests he believes he can coerce you. Halverson's hands tightened together. I've been chief for 8 years. I don't scare easily. Wolfe's gaze went to Halverson's wet collar, his rigid posture, his eyes. Yet you are here. Therefore you are frightened. Halverson swallowed. I'm not frightened for myself. Wolfe nodded once, as if that fit neatly. For whom then? Halverson's eyes flicked away. For people tonight. We'll have staff in corridors, donors in galleries, board members who think security is a uniform and a smile if someone planted something in those 12 minutes. A weapon, I said. Halverson's jaw tightened. Or something to force a response. Or something to cause panic. A stampede in a museum can kill as effectively as a gun. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And the unlocked door would be the alibi. Halverson leaned forward. That line, "The door will be your alibi." His voice roughened. That's what hit me. Whoever wrote it knows how blame works. If something happens, the story will be, security chief left the door unlocked. Negligence, failure, resignation, case closed. Wolfe's eyes gleamed faintly. Someone intends to write the conclusion in advance. I said, and you're the convenient villain. Halverson's gaze snapped to me. Yes. Wolfe tapped the note once with a thick finger. You did not comply. You relocked the door. Halverson's mouth tightened. Yes, and you came to me, Wolfe said. Instead of quietly firing someone or quietly doubling patrols. Halverson exhaled. Because doubling patrols doesn't stop a person who is already inside. And firing the wrong person creates noise without removing threat. I need certainty. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Certainty is expensive. Halverson didn't blink. Name it. Wolfe's eyes slid to me, Archie. I already knew what he wanted, the practical details that decide whether Wolfe will move his bulk or merely his mind. I said, Who besides you can disable the lock system? Halverson answered without hesitation. 3 people have administrator access. Me, my deputy, Rena Klein, and the museum operations manager, Walter Sills. The physical mechanical bolt can be left unthrown by anyone with a key. Keys are controlled, but keys travel. And the log showing disable at 4:12, I said. Records whose credentials were used. Halverson hesitated, a fraction. It should. That means, Wolfe said softly, that you have already looked. Halverson's eyes held his. Yes, Wolfe waited. When Halverson didn't speak, Wolfe's voice turned colder, and Halverson's mouth tightened. The credentials used were mine. The room went still in a very clean way. I let out a slow breath. That's awkward. Halverson's voice hardened. I did not disable it. I was in a meeting with the director at 4. 12 on camera witnessed. Yet my credentials were used. Wolfe's gaze sharpened, and now it wasn't just interest. It was annoyance. Someone had used Wolfe's favorite device, implication through misdirection. Your credentials were used, Wolfe repeated. Therefore someone has access to your authentication method. Halverson nodded. Badge, code, both. Someone either took my badge briefly or duplicated it, or his jaw tightened. Someone used the system in a way that makes it appear my credentials were used. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded. A story again, I said. And the note says the door will be your alibi, meaning the author intends to hang you from it. Halverson's face was hard now, the panic compressed into purpose. Yes, and if I go to the police, the museum will go into lockdown and the board will leak the story anyway, with me as the culprit and them as shocked victims. Wolfe's lips tightened. The board is always shocked. It is their principal skill. He looked at Halverson. Tell me about this new acquisition. Halverson hesitated. It's a painting, a late 19th century landscape, newly attributed, on loan pending purchase. Wolfe waved a hand dismissively. You said you are not here because of theft. Yet theft is a customary companion of museums. Why dismiss it? Halverson swallowed. Because the note doesn't mention the painting. It mentions the door. It mentions my job. It reads like a threat aimed at control, not profit. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Profit is not always money. Halverson looked frustrated. Then what? Wolfe's gaze moved over him slowly. Who would benefit if you were removed? Halverson's mouth tightened. My deputy would be promoted. The operations manager would gain authority. The director would appease the board by sacrificing me. And who, Wolfe asked, would benefit if there were chaos tonight? Halverson's eyes flicked away. Anyone who wants to force a decision. Anyone who wants to stop the acquisition. Anyone who wants to embarrass a donor. Anyone who wants to. Wolfe lifted a finger. Enough. You are listing the universe. He sat silent for a moment, thinking. The storm rattled the windows, as if impatient for a verdict. Fritz appeared with coffee, set it down with a quiet clink, and withdrew like a ghost who believed in good manners. Wolfe finally spoke. You are asking me to prevent a crime in progress. I do not enjoy such work. Halverson's eyes tightened. Then say no. Wolfe's gaze held him. Number, I will say yes. Halverson blinked, caught off guard. Wolfe continued. Not because I have affection for your museum, which I do not. Not because I have affection for your board, which I cannot. But because someone has attempted to construct a narrative in which negligence is the convenient cause of violence, that offends me. I said, Wolfe hates being written into other people's stories. Wolfe ignored my commentary as usual, but he didn't deny it. Mr. Halverson, he said, you will return to the museum. You will behave normally. You will not attempt amateur heroics. You will provide Mr. Goodwin with full access to your logs, your staff roster, and your security protocols. Halverson's posture stiffened. You're coming. Wolfe's expression soured. I am not, Mr. Goodwin will. I glanced at the storm outside. Lucky me. Wolfe's eyes narrowed at me. Archie, you will go at once. Examine the service door. Examine the lock. Housing. Obtain the lock logs. Speak to the 3 people with administrator access and to the guard who found the door unsecured. Determine why the author expected compliance. Halverson rose. I'll take you in through the staff entrance. Wolfe nodded. Good. And Mr. Halverson, bring me the notes envelope. If it exists, bring me any prior incident reports involving that door. Bring me your key control ledger. Halverson hesitated. You think this has happened before? Wolfe's eyes went flat. A man does not plan violence on his first attempt. He rehearses. Halverson swallowed, then nodded. As he turned toward the door, the phone on Wolfe's desk rang. Wolfe didn't move. He looked at me as if the ringing were my responsibility, which it was. Because Wolfe believes telephones should respect hierarchy, I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office. A woman's voice came sharp and breathless. This is Rena Klein, Deputy Security at the Van Wyck. Is Halverson there? I glanced at Halverson, who had stopped mid-step. He's here. What is it? There was a pause that lasted just long enough to contain a scream that didn't get released. Then she said very quietly, We've got a man down in the south corridor. Not a donor, not staff. He's dressed as maintenance, and the service door is unlocked again. I looked at Halverson. His face had gone rigid, the panic back and brighter. Behind him, the storm hit the windows like applause, and I realized the invitation wasn't for later. It was for now. Chapter 2, the Marlowe Museum, is one of those New York institutions that has 2 names. The one on the brass plaque, and the one people use when they want to sound as if they belong. The plaque says the Marlowe Museum of Art. The donors call it Marlowe. Everyone else calls it Van Wyck, because the Van Wyck Foundation paid for half the marble and all the ego. Boyd Halverson called it a disaster in progress, and that was the most accurate label I heard all night. We didn't take the front steps like civilized patrons. Halverson brought me in through the staff entrance on 43rd, where the storm had piled slush against the curb like an accusation. The back corridor smelled of wet wool, floor wax, and the kind of anxious coffee that gets brewed when people are trying to convince themselves they're still in control. A young guard in a rain-slick uniform met us and spoke before Halverson could ask. It's down there, he blurted, voice tight. South corridor, by the vault access. Halverson's jaw set. Has anyone touched anything? No, the guard said quickly. Rena told us no one touches. We blocked the hall. Halverson nodded once, approval that didn't soften his face. Then looked at me. You wanted to see the door. You'll see everything. Lucky me, I said, and followed him deeper. The museum after hours is supposed to feel sacred. Quiet galleries, dim lights, paintings resting like sleeping royalty. Tonight it felt like a stage after someone has yelled fire. Staff moving fast, voices low, shoes squeaking on polished floors, because nobody has time to walk with dignity. We turned a corner and met Rena Klein. She was Halverson's deputy, and she looked the part, lean, sharp-eyed, hair pulled back tight enough to signal discipline. She had a radio clipped to her shoulder and a calm that wasn't natural, calm made out of practice and necessity. "Boyd," she said, then her eyes flicked to me. "Who's this?" "Archie Goodwin," Halverson said, "working for Wolfe." Rena's eyebrows rose slightly. "Nero Wolfe," I said. "The one and only. He's at home disapproving of the weather." Rena's mouth tightened the way a competent person's mouth tightens when incompetence has just moved into the room and started giving instructions. "We called you, Boyd. I didn't think, I thought," Halverson cut in, "that if someone is staging this, Wolfe will see it faster than the police." Rena's eyes went hard. "There's a body in the vault corridor. The police are coming." Halverson's gaze held hers. "Yes, they're coming now, whether I like it or not." That was the first sign he had accepted he'd lost the battle for discretion. A security chief can contain a rumor. He can't contain a corpse. Rena turned, leading us down a short hall that ended at a set of steel doors marked authorized personnel only. A uniformed guard stood there like a post. Yellow tape had been strung across the doorway, and beyond it, the corridor lighting was brighter. Too bright, like someone had tried to bleach the scene with electricity. I saw the body before I stepped under the tape. He was on his back, angled awkwardly near the wall. Head turned as if he'd been listening for something that never arrived. A maintenance cart sat a few feet away, with a toolbox, a coil of wire, and a rag draped over the handle. The man himself wore dark work pants and a grey jacket with a stitched patch that said facilities. He could have been any one of 50 city employees who keep New York from collapsing into its own grime, except he had the wrong hands for a maintenance worker. They were clean, nails trimmed, no ingrained grease, and his shoes black, polished, were the shoes of someone who walks on carpets and knows it. Halverson crouched near him, careful. "He's not ours," he said. Rena's voice was tight. "Number we checked. Not staff, not contractor." I stepped closer, and the museum smell hit me, old stone, climate, controlled air, a faint trace of varnish from a nearby gallery. Under it was another smell, the metallic sourness of blood. The man's face was pale, eyes half open. There was a bruised mark on the side of his neck, dark and ugly. It didn't look like a punch. It looked like pressure knuckles, maybe, or a narrow edge. I glanced at the maintenance cart. Prop. Rena's eyes flicked to me. "What?" "The cart," I said. "The coat. The patch. He's dressed for a part." Halverson looked at me sharply. Her shock seemed genuine, but genuine shock doesn't prevent involvement. "It just makes it messier," he said. "Did Brand mention the South Service door, or the security logs?" Lila shook her head. "Number he mentioned the acquisition," he said. She hesitated again, then forced it out. "He said the attribution might be wrong." There it was. Wrong attribution means wrong value, wrong donors, wrong board decisions, wrong reputations. And reputations in museums are more delicate than oil paint, Rena said softly. "That would ruin the gala." Walter snapped. "We have documents, provenance, expert letters." I looked at him. "Documents can be staged too." Halverson's eyes narrowed. "Lila, did you tell anyone what Brand said?" Lila's voice was thin. "Only Walter. He handles operations. He needed to know in case we had to postpone." Walter's jaw tightened. "I advised we proceed. Donors are already flying in. The storm. The storm is not your donor," I said. "It doesn't care about your schedule." Halverson looked at me. "Archie, what do you think?" I didn't like being asked what I thought. That was Wolfe's territory. But Wolfe wasn't here, and the storm was, I said. Samana wanted Brand dead in a vault corridor, wearing a facilities jacket. Someone looped cameras for 12 minutes. Someone unlocked a service door using your credentials, yet nothing valuable is missing, Rena said. So it wasn't theft. I nodded. Not theft is the point. Halverson's face tightened. Then what? I said. Stagecraft. They all looked at me again, I continued. The unlocked door wasn't access. It was a prop. It was there to create a narrative. Intruder entered through careless security, tried for the vault, killed someone, escaped. Your job becomes the cause. Halverson's jaw clenched, and I saw anger replace panic. Anger at being written into someone else's script, Rinna said softly. So Brand was killed for what he knew, and placed where he'd be seen. Or killed where he'd be seen, I said. Either way, the location is meant to shout, theft, while the truth whispers silence. Walter Sills's voice was sharp. You're making assumptions. Assumptions are what you make when you don't look at evidence, I said. I'm looking. Halverson turned sharply. Archie, call Wolfe. Tell him Brand said attribution might be wrong, and the cameras looped for 12 minutes at 4:12. Tell him the door log. Shows my credentials. I'll tell him, I said. And I'll also tell him Walter Sills's tie is too tight for a man who's relaxed. Walter flushed. This is outrageous. Outrage is common in museums, I said. It's usually framed. Back in the security room, I phoned Wolfe and gave him the facts. Brand dead, vault corridor, no theft, 12-minute loop, door unlocked using Halverson's ID, and Brand's last complaint. Attribution might be wrong, and there were ears. Wolfe listened in silence. When I finished, he spoke with calm certainty. Mr. Goodwin, he said, you have been shown a performance. A performance with a corpse, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. The unlocked door is not opportunity, it is emphasis. Someone wishes a particular conclusion to be drawn. Halverson as villain, I said. Or as distraction, Wolfe corrected. Either is useful. I glanced at the monitors again, time looping obediently for 12 minutes like a bribed witness. What do you want next? Wolfe's voice hardened slightly. Bring me the note from Mr. Halverson and obtain a sample of typing from the museum's machines, especially the one used by Mr. Halverson. Also, secure Dr. Brand's briefcase or papers. An appraiser who dies near a vault leaves more than blood. I turned from the phone and saw Rena watching me. What did he say? She asked. I said, he said you're in a play and the playwright is still backstage. Halverson's voice came tight. And how do we drag him out? I looked at the security log timestamp, 4:12, and at the looping video that pretended nothing happened. I said, first we find what Brand saw that made him nervous enough to whisper about ears, because that's the line that got him killed. Reiner's radio crackled. A voice reported, detectives are on site. They want the security chief. Halverson's face tightened like a man stepping into a noose. He didn't tie. He looked at me. You're coming with me? Of course, I said. If you're going to be framed, you might as well have an audience. We headed back toward the vault corridor, and as we walked, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the maintenance cart's handle tucked beneath the rag, a small museum visitor sticker, bright red, round the kind schoolkids wear on field trips. It said in cheerful white letters, staff only. I stared at it, and the cheerful lie made my skin crawl. Because someone hadn't just staged a murder, they'd labeled it. Chapter 3 Wolfe arrived at the Marlow Museum as if he were doing it under protest, which of course he was. The storm had eased into a steady, sulky sleet, but Wolfe behaved as if the weather were a personal affront, a vulgarity flung at his brownstone by people with no sense of order. He kept his coat buttoned to the chin and his hat brim low, and I could tell he had already composed a lecture for Fritz about why decent meals should not be interrupted by corpses in cultural institutions. He didn't deliver it yet. He saved his irritation for the museum. They put us in a conference room off the administrative wing, the kind of space designed to look important while discouraging honesty. A long table, polite lighting, a framed print of something abstract that I'm sure cost more than my first car. Kramer was out in the hall, chewing on jurisdiction and a bad mood, so Wolfe had the luxury of being Wolfe without interruption. The museum's core players assembled like reluctant cast members, director Lila Hart, elegant and pale, Grant Van Wyck, donor and board prince, wearing his wealth like it owed him rent, Chief Curator Judith Pell, thin, sharp, clutching a folder as if it were her spine. Night Supervisor Evan Rook, a square-shouldered man with a tired face, and tech contractor Miles Harker, young, tense, with fingers that kept rubbing an invisible keyboard on the tabletop. Wolfe looked at them as if they were a set of mislabeled specimens. "You will answer questions," he said. "If you lie, you will merely extend your inconvenience." Grant Van Wyck smiled faintly. "Mr. Wolfe, we appreciate your—" "No," Wolfe said, and the word ended the smile. "You will not appreciate anything until the facts permit it." He began with the door. "Describe the South Service entrance," Wolfe said. Evan Rook cleared his throat. "It's a secure loading door, 2 locks, alarmed. It always—" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not use that word." Rook blinked. "Which word?" "Always," Wolfe said. "It is the refuge of the careless." Judith Pell bristled. "But it does always stay locked." Wolfe's gaze slid to her. "Madam, you are asserting a constant in a universe that has just produced a dead appraiser in a maintenance coat. Be modest." Miles Harker's voice came quick. "The system is designed to keep it locked. It auto-engages. It logs every override. There's redundancy." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Designed. Yes, yet 12 minutes disappeared." Lila Hart's hands tightened on the table edge. "We have procedures." Wolfe nodded once. "Procedures are what people cite when they do not wish to cite behavior." Grant Van Wyck leaned back. "Smooth. This is highly irregular. The board will want—" Wolfe cut him off. "The board wants many things. I want truth." He turned to Miles Harker. "Mr. Harker, you maintain the camera system." "Yes," Miles said. "Rutherford Systems. We service the servers, the DVRs, the lock integration." "And you insist," Wolfe said, "that the door always stays locked." Miles hesitated. "It should." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Schuled is a different word. A better one." He moved on like a man stepping from stone to stone across a river. "Who last saw Dr. Lionel Brand alive?" Lila Hart said. "I did. He left my office at 4:10. Judith Pell's eyes flicked. "He spoke to me briefly. He was upset." "Upset why?" Wolfe asked. Judith swallowed. "He said the attribution wasn't as secure as we'd been told." Grant Van Wyck's smile stiffened. "That is speculation." Wolfe's gaze held him. "It is assertion from an expert who is now dead. You should show more interest." Night Supervisor Rook spoke quietly. Brand went toward Gallery 3. Then the camera looped. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded. And during that loop the door was unlocked, and the appraiser was killed and positioned to tell a story. They shifted. Even Grant Van Wyck's Polish dulled under the weight of that. Wolfe stood abruptly, which always signals that something has offended him into motion. "Goodwin, the door." We went. The South Service entrance was ugly concrete, metal, utilitarian. The door itself was steel with an electronic panel and a heavy latch plate. It looked as if it could withstand a riot, which meant only a trusted hand could make it betray itself. Wolfe examined the latch plate with the intensity he usually reserves for orchids. He said nothing for a long moment, then pointed. "There," he said. Caught in the edge where the latch met the plate was a scrap of material. Thin, torn, dark. He leaned in. "Fabric." Wolfe nodded once. He produced his handkerchief, not to touch it directly, because Wolfe has principles, and used it to pull the scrap free. It was rubberized cloth, the kind used in work gloves. The tear was jagged. "Fresh." "A glove," I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Torn by haste." He held it up to the light. The edge was stretched, as if it had snagged and been yanked free by someone who did not dare pause. I said, "So whoever unlocked the door wasn't careful?" "On the contrary," Wolfe replied. "He was careful about what mattered. He expected this door to be examined after the event. He expected it to be the scapegoat. Therefore, he acted quickly and departed quickly, trusting that the narrative unlocked door storm intruder would be accepted." I glanced back at the museum corridor, at the polished floors, and the people who wanted the word always to be true. Expectation proves intent. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Yes, the door was not merely unlocked. It was meant to be discovered. That is stagecraft. He put the scrap into an evidence envelope I held open. Then he looked at me, eyes sharp. Now, he said, we find the actor who wore the glove and the author who wrote the script. Chapter 4, the museum security room had the nervous hum of a confession. Screens glowed, fans whirred, and every monitor seemed to be trying too hard to look innocent. If machines could sweat, the DVR rack would have needed a towel. Wolfe sat in a chair that looked too small for him and too expensive for the room, his hat on his knee, his eyes half-lidded. He let me do the moving because Wolfe's bulk is a policy statement. He moves only when the universe has proven it deserves the honor. Proceed, Archie, he said, as if I were about to carve a roast. Miles Harker hovered near the console with the brittle politeness of a man whose livelihood depended on explaining why technology never lies. Rena Kine stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Night Supervisor Evan Rook lingered by the door, looking like he'd prefer a simple burglary to this complicated mess. I pointed at the south entrance feed on Monitor 3. Here's the glitch everyone wants to believe in, I said. Starts at 4:12, ends at 4:24, 12 minutes. Miles cleared his throat. It could be a buffer issue, cooed Wolfe murmured. Mr. Harker, you are fond of that word. Use it sparingly. I ignored Miles and went straight to the dirt. I pulled the raw footage logs from the server, I said. Not just what the monitor shows. The file timestamps continue in real time. The frames do not. Rena leaned in, meaning the system was recording a loop file, I said. A saved segment replayed as live. The timestamp overlay kept rolling, because that's software level, but the pixel pattern repeats. Every snowflake, every reflection, every flicker. Miles's mouth opened, then shut. That's sophisticated. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Not sophisticated, intentional. I clicked through frames on the console and froze a moment at 4 hours 11 minutes and 58 seconds. A smear of slush near the ramp. A tiny drip from a pipe overhead. A footprint half formed in the wet. Then I jumped to 4 hours 23 minutes and 41 seconds. The same smear, the same drip, the same footprint, unchanged as if time had been paid to stand still. Wolfe said softly. Time was bribed. Miles swallowed. Someone would need admin access or physical access to the DVR. Wolfe looked at him. Yes. Rena's voice was flat. Which you have. Miles stiffened. So do you. So does Boyd. And Walter Sills, I added, because it was healthy to say his name aloud in a room full of suspects. Wolfe's gaze flicked to Evan Rook. Mr. Rook, during these 12 minutes, where were your corridor guards? Rook shifted. Uncomfortable. On rotation. Wolfe waited. Rook exhaled. Paul Jensen Soothe corridor was called away for a water leak. Rena's head snapped. A leak? Rook nodded reluctantly. Radio call came in, said there was water coming through the ceiling in the staff lounge near Gallery 6. He went to check. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who called it in? Rook hesitated. It came over the internal channel. That is not an answer, Wolfe said. Rook's face tightened. I don't know who. It was a voice, male, calm. Said it was urgent. I said, and there was no leak. Rook shook his head. None. Dry ceiling. Dry floor. He lost 5 minutes. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you are writing a schedule. Miles tried again weakly. The blackout could still be a system fault. Wolfe turned on him. A fault that begins precisely when a guard is lured away by a false emergency. Mr. Harker, your loyalty to coincidence is touching, Reiner said. So the guard is gone. Cameras loop. Door opens. They didn't just open a door, they opened a window. Wolfe nodded once. Exactly. He rose, slowly, filling the small room like a storm cloud with manners. Observe the structure, a staged distraction to empty the corridor, a timed loop to blind the cameras, an unlocked door to be discovered later and bear the blame, and a corpse positioned near the vault to shout, intruder. I said. The door wasn't a mistake. It was the centerpiece. Wolfe's eyes went colder. Yes, and the murderer did not merely open a door, Mr. Goodwin. He opened a schedule, 12 minutes purchased with planning. He looked at Rena Klein. Find the radio recording. Find the source of the leak call. Rena nodded, already moving. Wolfe's gaze returned to Miles Harker. And you, sir, will provide me with the access logs showing who loaded that loop file. Miles licked his lips. It might not show. Wolfe cut him off. It will show something. Systems are like men. They always leave traces of their habits. I watched Miles's hands tremble slightly as he turned to the console, and I thought about that scrap of glove in the latch plate, torn by hurry. The script was careful, but not perfect. Wolfe looked at the looping screen one last time, as if it offended him personally. Then, he said, very quietly, now we ask who knew the schedule well enough to sell 12 minutes. Chapter 5 in a museum. Nothing is ever simply found. It is discovered, unveiled, authenticated, catalogued, and, if you're unlucky, weaponized. The Marlowe Museum had managed all of that before lunch. We were back in the administrative wing when Rena Klein came briskly down the corridor with the expression of a woman delivering bad news in a tidy package. Mr. Wolfe, she said, we located Dr. Brand's briefcase. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. Located. Rena hesitated, then corrected herself. It was reported. By whom? Wolfe asked. By a guard, Rena replied. Paul Jensen. He was checking staff lockers for personal items, standard procedure after an incident. One locker was unlocked. Brand's briefcase was inside. I watched Wolfe's face. The word standard always makes Wolfe suspicious, the way a dog mistrusts a stranger's hand. A staff locker, Wolfe repeated. Dr. Brand was not staff. Rena shook her head. Number, but he was issued a temporary staff pass. He had access to the back corridors. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Did he have access to staff lockers? Rena's mouth tightened, not officially. Wolfe rose, reluctantly, as if the chair had betrayed him. Goodwin. That means we're going, I said, and went with him before the museum could invent more procedure. The staff locker room was down a service hall near the employee entrance. It smelled like damp coats, cheap deodorant, and the desperation of people who have to keep a calm face in public and then collapse in private. Rows of metal lockers lined the walls, each with a little dial lock. A bench ran down the middle, scarred by years of people dropping keys and curses. Paul Jensen stood there with a museum supervisor and the guilty look of a man who wishes he'd chosen accounting. This locker, he said, pointing. The door was ajar, which always irritates me because it's the laziest form of drama. Inside, sitting squarely as if it had been positioned by a ruler, was a black leather briefcase. It looked wrong, not because a briefcase can't sit in a locker, because it looked placed, not stuffed. In a locker room, things are jammed. Shoes, lunch bags, gloves, crumpled scarves. This briefcase sat like an exhibit. Wolfe didn't touch it. He never touches anything. He suspects is staged unless he has to, and even then he looks offended by the need. Who owns this locker? Wolfe asked. Paul Jensen swallowed. It's unassigned. We keep a few empties for temps, contractors, visitors with staff passes. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And it was left unlocked. Paul nodded quickly. Yes, that's why I checked. After what happened, we're supposed to secure everything. It might have been a sigh, or it might have been contempt. Rena, Wolfe said, remove it. Rena put on gloves, lifted the briefcase carefully, and set it on the bench, like a bomb in polite company. Wolfe nodded to me. Open it, Archie. That's my job title, I said, and flipped the clasps. Inside was the usual clutter of a professional man, a slim folder, a notebook, a pen case, and, on top, an envelope that had been inserted so it would be seen first. The envelope was cream paper, unsealed, typed address. Inside, a single letter. I pulled it out and read it once. Then I read it again because the first time I thought I'd invented it out of boredom, it was on museum letterhead. It was signed with a flourish, Dr. Lionel Brand, and it said in careful formal language that the incoming collection promised by Grant Van Wyck, several works being donated to anchor the gala and cement the board's pride, was counterfeit, not questionable, not requiring review, counterfeit, reputation poison, poured neat. I looked up. Well, that will improve the holiday spirit. Rena's face tightened. Paul Jensen stared as if he'd seen a ghost with a law degree. Wolfe held out his hand. I gave him the letter. He read it without hurry, which is Wolfe's way of showing he is already ahead of the room. His voice, when it came, was calm and murderous. "This is a forged verdict," Rena said. "Forged. It's on letterhead. It's signed." Wolfe's gaze stayed on the page, which is precisely why it is forged. The author wishes it to be believed immediately, without thought. That is the hallmark of a lie. Paul Jensen swallowed. But it's Brand's briefcase. Wolfe's eyes lifted. "Mr. Jensen, if you ever again present, found in a locker as proof of authorship, I will have you transferred to a museum of stupidity." Paul's cheeks reddened. He did not respond, because he had no safe response. I said, "This letter is aimed at Van Wyck." Rena nodded. "Grant Van Wyck is in the building. He was already furious about police presence." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Then let us see how furious he becomes when you suggest his name and counterfeit belong in the same sentence." Reiner looked uneasy. "You want him brought here?" "No," Wolfe said. "I do not wish to smell his cologne in a locker room. Bring him to the conference room. Bring the director, the curator, and Mr. Sills. Also, the night supervisor. This letter is a grenade thrown at governance. I prefer grenades to detonate in my presence." Rena moved, brisk and grateful to have orders. When she was gone, I leaned toward Wolfe and spoke low. "You think this is about the acquisition?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Not solely. The appraiser is dead. The cameras were looped. The door was staged. Now a letter appears that would force the board to cancel a gala, postpone a meeting, and humiliate its most powerful donor. This is not random violence. It is choreography." "You said stagecraft," I murmured. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "The murderer did not merely open a door. He opened a schedule. Now he attempts to open a decision." Back in the conference room, the cast assembled again, this time with one more player, Grant Van Wyck himself, wearing outrage with the ease of a man who has never been told no by anyone he pays. Lila Hart sat rigidly, face pale. Chief Curator Judith Pell held her folder like a shield. Walter Sills looked tight around the eyes. Evan Rook sat stiffly, hands clasped. Miles Harker hovered near the wall, looking as if he wanted to dissolve into pixels. Wolfe placed the letter on the table in front of Grant Van Wyck without ceremony. Grant read it, and his face went through 3 stages: disbelief, offense, then something colder. "This is insane," he said sharply. "Brand would never." "He is dead," Wolfe replied. "The dead are often made to speak conveniently." Lila Hart's voice trembled. "Where did you get this?" Wolfe looked at her. "In Dr. Brand's briefcase, found in an empty staff locker, helpfully left unlocked." Judith Pell's eyes widened. "A locker," Walter Sills said too quickly. "That proves nothing." "Correct," Wolfe said. "It proves intent." Grant's hand tightened on the letter. "If this gets out," Wolfe's gaze held him. "It will get out if you behave as if you have something to hide. The truth is not protected by tantrums." Grant stared at him. "Are you accusing me?" Wolfe's voice remained level. "I am accusing no one yet. I am asking a question: who benefits?" Lila Hart's jaw tightened. "Benefits from what?" Wolfe tapped the letter once, "From chaos immediately before a board meeting." That landed. Even Grant's outrage paused long enough to listen. Judith Pell swallowed. "The board meeting is tomorrow morning," she said quietly. "They were going to vote on the acquisition." "And on the Van Wyck gift," Lila added, voice tight. "And on funding allocations for next year." Wolfe nodded once. 3 decisions, 1 storm, 1 corpse, 1 letter that would poison a donor and paralyze a vote. Walter Sills leaned forward. You're implying someone is trying to control the board. Wolfe looked at him as if the implication were obvious enough to be printed on a brochure. Yes, Grant snapped. This is an attack on my name. It is an attack on your leverage, Wolfe corrected. Names are merely labels. Leverage is power. Miles Harker blurted. The letter could be real. Wolfe's eyes slid to him. It could, yet it is extraordinarily convenient that Brand expresses this verdict only after his death and only in a locker. Evan Rook's voice came rough. Brand was upset. He said the attribution might be wrong. Judith Pell stiffened. He said it wasn't secure, not that it was counterfeit. Grant glared at her. Judith, you assured us. Judith's face tightened. I assured you based on the documentation provided. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Documentation can be manufactured. That is the point of museums, to persuade the public that the label is truth. Lila Hart's voice was controlled now, anger steadying her. Mr. Wolfe, what are you saying? That the acquisition is fake, that Grant's collection is fake, that my museum is... Wolfe raised a hand. She stopped, as if remembering that Wolfe's interruptions are final. I am saying, Wolfe replied, that someone wants the board to believe one of those things immediately, without verification, because belief will force action, cancel the gala, cancel the meeting, sacrifice someone, preserve someone else. Grant snapped. And you think that someone is inside this room? Wolfe's eyes held him. Inside the museum, certainly. The briefcase did not walk into a locker by itself. Walter Sills said, You can't know that. Wolfe's gaze went cold. Mr. Sills, do not insult my intelligence. A staff locker room is not accessible to donors, and a storm does not forge signatures. I leaned in slightly. Wolfe, you said a forged verdict. Wolfe nodded without looking at me. Yes, because the real prize here is not a stolen painting. It is control over the verdict. What is authentic? What is counterfeit? What is purchased? What is postponed? Museums run on verdicts the way courts do. Judith Pell's fingers tightened on her folder. Brand's job was to deliver a verdict. Precisely, Wolfe said. And he appears to have discovered something that threatened someone's desired verdict. Therefore, he was removed, staged, and now made to accuse a donor. Grant's voice went sharp. If you're suggesting I'm being framed, you'd better have... Wolfe cut him off. If you wish to threaten me, sir, do so with something more interesting than your self-importance. Grant shut his mouth. His face reddened. Wolfe turned to Lila Hart, director, who knew Brand was uneasy about the attribution. Lila hesitated. Walter, Judith, Rena was informed that he wanted extra security. And you, Wolfe said. Yes, Lila admitted. Wolfe looked at Judith Pell, curator, who prepared the provenance file. Judith's chin lifted. I did, with assistance from our registrar. And who, Wolfe asked, insisted the gala proceed regardless of Brand's concern. Lila's gaze flicked to Walter Sills. Walter's jaw tightened. We had donors flying in, contracts, catering. This storm, Wolfe's voice went sharper. The storm is not an argument. It is a circumstance. Someone used it. Now, who benefits if the board meeting is derailed? Silence. Then Evan Rook said reluctantly, if the acquisition vote is delayed, the loan agreement extends. The insurance terms shift. Some people gain time. Wolfe nodded. Time again. Miles Harker swallowed. If the donor's reputation is damaged, the board could distance itself. Appoint new leadership, restructure. Wolfe's gaze slid to him. And who desires restructuring? Miles flinched. Wolfe looked at Grant Van Wyck. Sir, if your promised collection is declared counterfeit, publicly, before verification, what happens? Grant's jaw worked. My name is dragged through every paper. My foundation looks foolish. The board panics. Lila could be forced out for incompetence. Security could be blamed, the curator could be blamed. Wolfe nodded once. Many scapegoats. Convenient. He leaned back. Now consider the possibility that the letter is not aimed at you alone. It is aimed at the board's behavior. Fear makes boards decisive. Fear makes them stupid. Fear makes them accept whatever conclusion is offered first, I said. And whoever staged the door and looped the cameras is offering conclusions. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes. First, an intruder. Second, counterfeit. Third, perhaps, resignations, postponements, emergency votes. Lila Hart's voice came low. Brand's briefcase was planted. Wolfe regarded her. Yes, she swallowed. Then someone in this building is trying to take control of my museum. Wolfe's tone was dry. Someone is trying to take control of a narrative. Museums are merely one of the more expensive stages. He tapped the letter again. We will verify whether Brand ever typed this, whether the signature is traced, whether the letterhead is authentic or printed, and whether the content is based on any true discovery. Meanwhile, I ask once more, who benefits from chaos right before the board meeting? No one answered, because the truth is that everyone benefits a little from everyone else being embarrassed, until the embarrassment lands on them. Wolfe's eyes moved slowly over each face, and I could see him doing what he always does, weighing not just motives, but appetites. Then he said, very calmly, Goodwin, obtain the museum's typewriters, everyone that can produce that letterhead. Also obtain the board agenda and the list of votes expected tomorrow. Grant Van Wyck stiffened. You can't. Wolfe looked at him. I can. Your museum is already a crime scene. Your preferences are now decorative. Grant's face darkened, but he held his tongue. Even he could sense that this was not the moment to wrestle with a man who enjoyed winning more than he enjoyed breathing. As the meeting broke up into uneasy motion, I pocketed my own conclusion. Whoever planted Brand's briefcase wasn't trying to steal art. They were trying to steal authority. And in a museum, authority is worth more than any painting on the wall. Chapter 6, New York at midnight. Looks like it has made peace with sin and decided to charge rent. The storm had backed off into a thin, icy drizzle that turned streetlights into smeared halos and made every taxi windshield wiper sound like a metronome for bad decisions. I was out in it because Wolfe had sent me, and Wolfe sends you out the way a general sends infantry. Confidently from a warm chair, Grant, Van Wyck left the museum with the tight, offended stride of a man who thinks the city should apologize for touching his shoes. He didn't go home. He didn't go to his foundation office to issue statements. He went where men go when they want something handled without minutes being taken. I stayed 2 cars back in a cab and let my driver grumble about rich folks, while I watched Van Wyck's town car glide through wet streets like a shark with headlights. We crossed town, slid down past darkened storefronts and the kind of bars that stay open because regret keeps them employed, and finally stopped at a diner on the west side that still believed in coffee and discretion. The place was a long, low room under neon that buzzed like a cheap conscience. The sign outside promised breakfast all night, which is true in the way most promises are. If you lower your standards enough, Van Wyck went in first. No umbrella, because men like him think weather is for other people. I followed 10 seconds later, shaking off drizzle and adopting my best expression of a guy who just wants eggs and doesn't care who else is present. It's an easy expression for me. I've worn it at worse scenes. He was in a back booth already, coat still on, posture rigid, eyes scanning, and across from him, hunched uneasy, trying to look smaller than his own panic, sat Miles Harker, the tech contractor. Miles had a mug in both hands, as if heat could keep him from sliding off the bench. Van Wyck leaned in and spoke with the calm of a man ordering service. I slid into a stool at the counter, angled my body so the chrome coffee machine served as a mirror, and listened with one ear while pretending to care about pie. Van Wyck's voice carried just enough. I don't pay for surprises. Miles's reply came thin. I told you it would hold. It didn't, Van Wyck said. There's a dead appraiser and police in the building. Miles swallowed. It wasn't supposed to. This fast. We had a schedule. Van Wyck's laugh was soft and humorless. Schedules change when people don't behave, Miles said. Wolfe is in it. That wasn't. Van Wyck's eyes hardened. Wolfe is an irritation. Irritations are dealt with. That sentence sounded like money trying to impersonate muscle. Van Wyck reached into his coat and placed something on the table between them. In the mirror, it looked like a thick envelope. Miles stared at it the way a starving man stares at a steak and wonders if it's poisoned. Van Wyck spoke again, low and precise. You will give me the access log, the full one, not the cleaned version you gave the police. I want to know what you loaded, when, and from which terminal. Miles's mouth opened. I can't, Rena Boyd. Van Wyck cut in. You can, you will, and you will tell me what Brand said to Hart. Miles froze. What? Van Wyck's gaze stayed on him. Don't play foolish. Brand didn't die because he wanted a second look at brushwork. He died because he was going to deliver a verdict privately. Miles's face drained. I don't know. Van Wyck leaned forward. You do know. You've been inside the security room with your hands on the system. You've been listening. Now speak. Miles's voice cracked. He scheduled something, Lila said. She said Brand wanted to see her alone. Tonight, after closing. No board. No donor. That landed in my gut like a dropped weight. Van Wyck's jaw tightened. When? Miles swallowed. 8:30, in the director's office. He said he needed to tell her something before the gala. Van Wyck's eyes narrowed. And she told you? Miles nodded, miserable. She asked me to make sure the corridor cameras were working. She didn't trust the system after the door thing. Van Wyck's mouth tightened, and for the first time his calm looked strained. A secret, second appraisal, just for her. He stared at Miles. That would have changed everything. Miles whispered. Yes. Van Wyck's voice turned colder. It would have ruined the plan. Miles flinched. Plan? Van Wyck didn't answer him. He slid the envelope closer. You'll give me what I asked for, tonight. Miles's fingers twitched toward the envelope. If the police... Van Wyck's gaze sharpened. The police are noise. The board is power. Remember why you agreed to work with me? Miles's voice came out in a rush. I agreed because you said it was just leverage. Just delay the vote, make them postpone until the provenance file was strengthened. I didn't agree to murder. Van Wyck's smile was thin. You agreed to a schedule. The schedule required silence. Miles's eyes filled with something like horror. Brand became a variable, Van Wyck said. Variables are removed. That was enough for me. I drained my coffee, tossed a bill on the counter, and left without looking back. I didn't want the neon reflecting on my face when I called Wolfe. Outside, the drizzle had turned to a fine sting. My cab was still there because my driver had decided I looked like the kind of customer who tips for silence. I slid in and said, West 35th, fast, and pretend you're not fast. He grunted and drove, at the brownstone. The front room smelled like warmth and certainty, two things the museum lacked. Wolfe was in the office. Of course, coat off, hat gone, settled back into his chair, as if he had never been dragged into culture at all. Fritz had provided coffee. Saul Panzer stood near the door, with the calm of a man who could end arguments by altering their physics. Wolfe looked up as I entered. Report. Grant Van Wyck just bribed Miles Harker in a diner, I said. Envelope on the table, wanted the full access log, and wanted to know what Brand told Director Hart. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. So the donor is purchasing the narrative. Not just purchasing, I said, directing. Miles admitted Brand scheduled a secret second appraisal, 8:30 tonight. Hart alone, no board, no donors. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Ah, I continued. Van Wyck said that private verdict would have changed everything. He called it ruining the plan. Miles says he signed on for leverage, delay the vote. strength and provenance. No murder. Saul's voice came quiet, and Van Wyck spoke as if murder was an adjustment. Yes, I said. He said variables are removed. Wolfe sat still for a moment, fingertips together, gaze fixed on nothing. When he spoke, his tone was calm and heavy. Dr. Brand intended to testify privately to the director before the gala and before the board meeting, Wolfe said. Therefore, he had discovered a truth that could not be permitted to reach the board. I said, so the murder wasn't about the vault, it was about the clock. Wolfe nodded once. Precisely, the unlocked door, the 12-minute loop, the false water leak. These were not merely cover. They were timing. They created a window in which Brand could be killed and positioned before he delivered his second verdict. And then his briefcase shows up with a letter accusing Van Wyck, I said. A neat reversal. Dead man condemns the donor instead of warning the director. Wolfe's mouth tightened. A forged verdict to replace the real one, Saul asked. Van Wyck ordered it? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He benefits from controlling the board's perception. But ordering is not the same as executing. The question is, who had the ability to loop the cameras and stage the door, and who had the need to ensure Brand never spoke alone to Hart? I leaned forward. Wolfe, if Hart was expecting Brand at 8:30, she knows something now, or she knows what she didn't get to hear. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Yes, Miss Hart is now a pivot. He reached for the phone with a slow certainty that made my skin prickle. Archie, we will invite Director Hart here tonight. I blinked. Invite. Wolfe's eyes went cold. Summon, if you prefer accuracy. She will come because she is in danger, and because she suspects that the museum is being steered into disaster by men who purchase schedules. He paused, then added softly. And because she has just learned that a donor's money can buy silence, but not truth. I glanced toward the window, where the sleet ticked against the glass like impatient fingers. Now, Wolfe said, lifting the receiver, we shall see whether the second verdict died with Dr. Brand, or whether it merely changed its address. Chapter 7. If you want to see how a museum really runs, don't look at the paintings, look at the labels. A painting can be honest and still get hanged with bad paperwork. Labels decide what the public believes, what donors brag about, and what boards vote to fund. Labels are the museum's sworn testimony, typed, stamped, and filed by people who rarely get their names in print unless something burns down. That night, something almost did. Wolfe's summons to director Lila Hart produced her at the brownstone an hour later, snow melting off her coat like she'd walked through bad headlines. She came in with her chin up, because directors do not arrive looking frightened. They arrive looking offended at being made to hurry. She sat in the red leather chair opposite Wolfe, and tried to control the room by controlling her breathing. Wolfe let her try. Then he said, Miss Hart, Dr. Brand scheduled a private conference with you at 8:30. The color drained from her face in one clean motion. Who told you that? Wolfe's eyes remained half-lidded. Answer the question. Lila's hands tightened on her purse. Yes, Brand insisted. He said he couldn't speak freely in the museum. He said he needed to tell me something before the board meeting. And you told Mr. Sills, Wolfe said. She flinched. Walter manages operations, he needed. He needed nothing. Wolfe cut in. He needed control. Saul Panzer stood by the door, quiet as a locked cabinet. I sat at my desk, watching Lila's face do the math she didn't want to do. Lila swallowed. Brand said the acquisition file had been tampered with. He said there were inconsistencies in the provenance chain. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Did he use the word counterfeit? No, she said quickly. Not exactly. He said the attribution might be engineered. He said someone wanted a verdict. Wolfe nodded once, satisfied, and he died before delivering his second verdict. Lila's gaze snapped to me. You think someone killed him to stop him talking to me? I think, Wolfe said, that someone killed him to stop him changing tomorrow's vote. Lila's mouth tightened. Then we should cancel the board meeting, cancel the gala, lock the building down. Wolfe's voice turned dry. You will do part of that. She blinked. Part? Wolfe leaned back a fraction. Cancelling a gala is expensive. Locking a museum is humiliating. You will not do either unless forced, therefore. I will force one, publicly, and observe who panics. Lila stared. You're using my museum as bait. Wolfe's eyes held hers. Your museum is already bait. Someone has been placing hooks in it all day. He turned his gaze to me. Archie, return to the museum. Speak to curator Kim Rayner. Lila frowned. Kim, collections curator, she said reluctantly. Kim Rayner oversees inventory and tags. Wolfe nodded. She will know which truths are being edited. So I went back into the night because that's what I do when Wolfe points at a problem and says in effect, go be the legs I refuse to be. The museum had changed since I left. Police were present now, in a way donors could smell, and staff moved with that careful speed. That means everyone is watching everyone else, while pretending not to. The gala setup had been paused, which is a museum phrase meaning we're panicking, but we're doing it quietly. Rena Klein met me near the staff corridor. Wolfe wants Kim Rayner, I told her. Rena's eyes tightened. Kim's in collections. She's been arguing with Walter. Something about tags. That's my kind of something, I said. Take me. Collection storage is where the museum keeps its secrets, crates, catalogues, racks of framed works, and 1,000 cardboard tags that tell the world what to believe. The air down there was colder, and smelled of wood, paper, and controlled humidity. Kim Rayner was at a work table under a bright lamp, bent over a tray of inventory tags like a surgeon with a bad patient. She looked up as we entered. She was in her 30s, dark hair pinned back, face sharp with fatigue and competence. Her eyes were angry. About time, she snapped at Rena. Then her gaze shifted to me. Who are you? Archie Goodwin, I said. I'm the man sent by Nero Wolfe to ask rude questions. Kim's mouth tightened. Good. I have answers, and I've been waiting for someone who won't tell me to calm down. Rena said, Kim, what's going on? Kim held up a tag between two fingers. It was thick cardstock with printed fields, artist, title, provenance, status, a barcode at the bottom. The kind of thing that looks boring until it decides a board meeting. Look at the status field, she said. I leaned in, the status read. Pending authenticity, doubt Fay possible replica. That wasn't there yesterday, Kim said tightly. Yesterday it read verified. On loan pending purchase. Rena frowned. So someone edited a tag. Not one, Kim snapped. A set incoming Van Wyck collection items. Staging pieces, supporting works. The ones he's using as leverage. Their tags have been changed to imply they're counterfeit. Not in a memo, not in an email, right on the physical tags and in the database mirror. I said, fresh edits. Kim's eyes flashed. Exactly, the ink on the printed overlays is fresh, the adhesive is fresh. Whoever did it wants anyone who checks the racks tonight to discover doubts and carry that story upstairs like a tray of poison. Rena's voice went cold. Who has access to tags? Kim gave a short laugh. Too many. Walter insists on cross. Access. For efficiency. The registrar has it. I have it. Judith Pell has it. Walter has it. And Miles Harker can reach the database through the system. I heard Wolfe's voice in my head. Someone is manufacturing a false reality, detail by detail. Kim didn't know she was quoting him yet, but she was living it. Why didn't you report it? I asked. Kim's gaze sharpened. I did to Walter. He told me I was overreacting. He said the appraiser's letter. She spit the word. Made it necessary to flag items. Rena's jaw clenched. The letter in Brand's briefcase. Kim nodded, furious. A letter that might be forged, and suddenly my tags are being edited to match it. That's not caution, that's staging. Where were you when you found this? I asked. Kim pointed toward a small stairwell door. In the basement archive. I went down to verify original tag history. The stairwell is usually locked. Rena frowned. Usually, Kim shot her a look. Yes. Usually tonight. It was propped, that word. Propped. Hit me the same way always did. A museum does not casually prop secure doors unless someone wants motion, Kim continued. I was halfway up when I heard footsteps behind me, fast. Someone grabbed my coat from the back. Rena's eyes widened. Kim's mouth tightened. I went over the rail, not fully, just enough to see the floor come up at me. My stomach tightened. A sub-basement stairwell can kill as efficiently as a gun, and it has the advantage of looking like clumsiness. What saved you? I asked. Kim lifted her hand. Her fingers trembled a little now that she was saying it. The tag tray, she said. I was carrying the tray. I swung it back without thinking. It hit whoever it was. Hard, they let go. Rena exhaled, sharp. Did you see them? Kim's eyes narrowed. A coat, dark, gloves. Not museum gloves. Work gloves, and a smell, cheap cologne. Work gloves. I thought of the torn scrap of glove in the latch plate. Which hand? I asked. Kim blinked. What? Which glove snagged you? I said. She frowned, thinking. Right hand. I felt the pull on my left shoulder. Right hand grabbed. That mattered. The scrap Wolfe had pulled from the latch plate was torn as if snagged and yanked. Right hand glove could be missing a corner now. Rena's voice turned hard. Kim, you should have told me immediately. Kim's eyes flashed. I tried. You were busy with corpses and directors. Walter was telling me to stop making trouble, so I came up and started pulling tags, because if I don't stop this, the board will walk into tomorrow's meeting already believing what someone printed for them. I said, and someone tried to remove you. Kim's jaw tightened. Yes. We stood there for a moment, the cold storage air pressing in. The museum above us hummed with its expensive anxiety somewhere. A donor was probably sipping wine and pretending nothing had changed. I said, Kim, do you have the original tag history? She nodded and tapped a folder, printed audit trail and screenshots. I'm not stupid. Good, I said. Wolfe likes evidence with teeth. Rena asked, what do we do now? I heard Wolfe again, this time not in my head but on the phone when I called him from the storage office. I gave him the essentials, altered inventory tags to support the counterfeit story, fresh edits, a propped stairwell, an attempted shove, work gloves, cheap cologne. Wolfe listened. When I finished, his voice came out calm and final. Mr. Goodwin, he said, our adversary is not merely lying, he is manufacturing reality. Yes, I said, detail by detail. Exactly, Wolfe replied. Therefore we must deny him the workshop. He paused, then said, Director Hart will order a public lockdown of every door, every service entrance, every stairwell, every staff access. Announce it loudly, make it official. Rena, listening over my shoulder, stiffened. That'll cause panic. Wolfe's voice stayed cool. That is the point. The person who has been propping doors and opening schedules will now be denied his timing. He will signal himself by attempting to restore it, I said. You're waiting for the panic signal. Yes, Wolfe replied. In a carefully manufactured reality, the first true fact is inconvenience. It provokes the author. He hung up. Rena stared at me. He wants me to lock down the entire museum. Not you, I corrected. Director Hart, publicly. Rena's mouth tightened. Walter will hate it. Good, I said. Let him hate it loudly. We went upstairs to Lila Hart, and when she heard what happened to Kim Rayner, her face hardened in a way I liked. Directors can be vain, but they don't enjoy attempted murder in their basements. She issued the order over the internal system and to the police on site, all doors secured, all access points sealed, all staff held in place until further notice. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't donor-friendly, it was real, and as the announcement rolled through the museum, you could feel the building react, the way a theater reacts when the audience coughs at the wrong time. Someone, somewhere, had just lost their schedule. Now all we had to do was wait and see who tried to get it back. Chapter 8. The first thing a lockdown does in a building full of expensive objects is offend people who believe money should come with a master key. The second thing it does is frighten the people who have been using doors the way a pickpocket uses elbows. Quietly, naturally, and only when no one is looking. Director Lila Hart's announcement went out over the museum's internal system with the crispness of a woman who had decided she'd rather be hated than buried. All access points are now secured. No staff exits without clearance. All service doors remain locked. This is a police matter. You could feel the words hit the building. In the gala gallery upstairs, donors stiffened. In the back corridors, guards tightened up in collections. Kim Raynor stopped shaking long enough to look satisfied. And somewhere in some corner that wasn't supposed to matter, an invisible hand found itself suddenly slapped. I was in the admin corridor outside the security suite, with Rena Klein and two plainclothes detectives, when the building answered the lock. Down the way, trouble always answers. Loudly, the fire alarm shrieked. It wasn't the polite beep of a smoke detector. It was the full-throated howl that makes respectable people forget their manners and remember their legs. Red strobes began pulsing on the walls like angry eyes. Somewhere behind a door, a klaxon joined in, and the whole museum turned into a blinking, screaming machine designed to produce one result. Movement. Rena's head snapped up. Number one of the detective swore. Fire! Rena was already moving, radio at her mouth. Control, confirm source. I want the panel location now. The loudspeakers crackled, and a recorded voice tried to sound calm while losing the fight. Attention. Please proceed to the nearest exit. Do not use elevators. That last part was funny in a grim way, because no one in the museum had been planning to use elevators in a panic anyway. Panic prefers stairs and shoulders. In the gala wing, the donor crowd started flowing, slow at first, then faster as the alarm's insistence got under their skin. Staff tried to guide them, which is like trying to steer a river with a spoon. Security moved to posts, but the lockdown had just turned into a forced evacuation, and forced evacuation is a gift to anyone who likes chaos. I said to Rena, "That's your panic signal." Her eyes were hard. Yes, and it's on cue. We ran. Me Rana, a detective, and a guard, toward the fire panel near the South Service corridor. The alarm noise swallowed speech, so we communicated the old-fashioned way, eyes, gestures, and the occasional shouted insult. At the corridor junction, I saw Evan Rook, the night supervisor, moving fast against the flow. He wasn't evacuating. He wasn't herding donors. He was heading deeper, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed forward, like a man following an appointment. And in his hand, glinting under the strobes, was a fat ring of keys, master keys. I grabbed his sleeve as he tried to slip past. "Hey," I shouted. He jerked, eyes wide, then recognized me and tried for indignation. "Goodwin, let go. I have to." "To what?" I demanded. "Save the building with your key ring." Rook's gaze darted toward the south corridor. His mouth opened. Nothing came out but the alarm scream. Rena shoved in beside me, face like a knife. "Evan, why do you have masters?" Rook licked his lips. Because this is my job." "In a fire?" Rena snapped. "In a lockdown." Rook's eyes flicked, and I saw it then, not guilt, exactly fear. The fear of a man who is being pushed by something he can't name aloud. He said, too quickly, "The South Service door. If it's locked, evacuation bottlenecks." "Evacuation isn't through the loading dock," I shouted. "And you know it." Rook's jaw clenched. "I'm trying to keep people safe." Rena grabbed the keyring from him. "You're trying to keep someone free." Rook flinched as if she'd slapped him. The detective said, "We can cuff him." Rena hesitated. She looked at me, and in her eyes was the same thought Wolfe had planted in both of us. The hand behind this was clever, close, and still moving. If we grabbed the wrong piece, we'd tip the board and lose the game. Then Rena's radio crackled. "Panel shows Zone 4, South Service Corridor. Pulse station triggered." Zone 4, of course it was. I released Rook and ran because my instincts are poor but honest. Rena ran too, keyring in hand. The detective cursed and followed. We hit the South Service entrance in time to see two guards standing there, confused, facing a door that should have been sealed by policy, lockdown order, and common sense. The door was ajar, not wide open, just enough to ruin an argument. Cold air pushed in, carrying drizzle and the faint smell of exhaust. The electronic lock panel blinked green as if pleased with itself. I felt my stomach tighten. That door is unlocked again. Rena stared at it, jaw set. Impossible. Not impossible, I said. Useful. She rushed to the panel, keyed in her code, checked the status. The system insisted the lock was engaged. The door insisted it wasn't. Dawn Guard said over the alarm. We didn't touch it. It was locked 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago, I muttered. 12 minutes earlier. Someone bought time. Now they're spending it. I knelt at the latch plate with my penlight and saw what Wolfe had predicted. A little more scarring, a fresh scrape, and caught at the edge. Another thread of torn glove, as if someone had ripped free in a hurry again. Whoever this was, they were fast, practiced, and still not perfect. Rena's eyes were wild now, furious. She jabbed the key in the mechanical bolt and threw it hard. Secure it. A guard moved to hold the door shut. Another started directing evacuees away from the corridor. Behind us, Evan Rook hovered, breathing fast, eyes flicking between the door and the crowd, like a man watching his own trial unfold. I turned on him. You were headed here. Rook swallowed. Because I heard the pull station was in this zone. You heard? I said. From where? He hesitated. Radio. Rena snapped. Who told you? Rook's face tightened. He looked, for a split second, like he might name someone. Then his eyes flicked toward the security suite hallway, toward where Walter Sills had been earlier, and the name died in his throat. I leaned in, close enough that he could hear me under the alarm. You're being used, Rook. His eyes flashed. You don't know that. Oh, I said. I know a tool when I see one. You've got the right shape. Rena's radio barked again. No smoke. No heat. No sprinkler activation. False alarm. False alarm. True chaos. The detectives exchanged looks. The building's recorded voice kept pleading for calm while producing none. Donors were now in the main lobby, coats half on, tempers rising. Staff were trying to keep them from shoving each other into priceless marble. It was a decent imitation of order collapsing. I pulled out my phone and called Wolfe. He picked up on the second ring, sounding as if he had been waiting with the receiver hovering in the air. It fired, I said. Fire alarm. Right after the lockdown announcement. Pull station in Zone 4 South Service Corridor. And the service door was found unlocked again during the evacuation swirl. Wolfe's voice was calm. Of course, I said. I caught Evan Rook moving against the flow with master keys. He claims he was preventing bottlenecks. Wolfe's tone turned faintly contemptuous. Mr. Rook is a tool, agreed, I said. But the door shows fresh scrape marks and another torn bit of glove. Whoever is doing this is close, fast, and still in the building. Wolfe was silent for a beat. When he spoke, his words came out like a verdict being written. The lock. Down removed his schedule. The alarm attempted to restore it. Therefore he is nearby, and he has access to the alarm system and to the door mechanism. Rena leaned close. Listening, Wolfe continued. Mr. Goodwin, do not arrest Mr. Rook yet. A tool is useful when it remains in the hand. Instead, watch who retrieves it. Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. The hand is moving, and it is close. I hung up and pocketed the phone. Rena's eyes were hard. What did he say? I nodded toward Rook. He said we don't grab the hammer when we're trying to catch the carpenter. Rena tightened her grip on the key ring. Then, what do we do? I watched the lobby crowd swirl, the guards shuffle, the detectives look uncertain, and the South Service door sit there like a grin that shouldn't exist. Then, I said, we keep the door locked, we keep Rook in sight, and we wait. For what? Rena demanded. For the person who needs that door unlocked, I said. Because if Wolfe is right, the next move won't be subtle. And right then, through the chaos, I saw Walter Sills step out of the security suite corridor, walking too calmly for a man in a fire alarm, eyes scanning, not for smoke, not for donors, but for one specific point, the South Service door. He spotted Rook. Rook spotted him, and the look that passed between them lasted only a fraction of a second, just long enough to tell me that the hand behind the chaos had just reached for its tool. Chapter 9. By the time the museum's fire alarm stopped screaming, and everyone remembered they owned dignity, the building had the look of a place that had been shaken and found hollow in a few important spots. The donors were angry, the staff were pale, the police were irritated, and the South Service door sat there like a joke. Someone kept retelling, because it made the right people flinch. I rode back to the brownstone with sleet on my collar, and the taste of smoke that hadn't existed. False alarm smoke, the kind that comes from panic instead of combustion. Saul Panzer rode with me because Saul is what Wolfe orders when the universe starts trying door handles. We reached West 35th and found Wolfe in his office as if he had never left it. Which is Wolfe's finest trick. He lets the rest of the city run around sweating while he sits still and makes it feel like the city is the one being unreasonable. He looked up as I came in. Report. I gave it to him in the order it had happened, the lockdown announcement. The fire alarm on cue, the evacuation swirl, the South Service door unlocked again, the fresh scrape marks and the new shred of glove, Evan Rook moving against the flow with master keys, and Walter Sills scanning the corridor, as if checking whether his tool was still attached to his hand. Wolfe listened without interrupting, which meant he was building the structure in his head and didn't need my narration except as nails. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, eyes half-lidded. "Stagecraft," he murmured. "Stagecraft with strobes," I said. "It's modern." Wolfe ignored my attempt at humor and looked at Saul. "Mr. Panzer, did you observe anything unusual?" Saul's voice was flat. Rook was waiting for instruction. Sills gave it with his eyes. Wolfe nodded once. "Yes," he turned to me. "Did you retrieve the access log Mr. Van Wyck attempted to purchase?" I patted my inside pocket. I retrieved what I could. Miles Harker didn't hand it over in the diner, but he was sloppy. When he left, he didn't clear his phone screen. I saw the terminal ID for the loop upload and the time stamp. I wrote it down. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. And I gave him the numbers. Wolfe didn't react outwardly, but his eyes tightened the way they do when a lock clicks. Good. That will suffice. The doorbell rang then, and for a moment I hoped it was Fritz delivering good news in the form of dinner. It wasn't. Fritz ushered in Inspector Kramer, soaked, glowering, and dragging behind him two museum people who looked as if they'd rather face the fire alarm again than Wolfe's living room. Director Lila Hart came first, posture straight, face set, eyes tired. Behind her was Kim Rayner, the collection's curator, holding a folder and looking like a woman who had spent the last 2 hours fighting altered tags and stairwell railings. Rena Klein followed them, jaw tight, with Boyd Halverson last, wet coat, hard eyes, the expression of a man watching his career get used as kindling. Kramer barked. "All right, Wolfe, now we talk." Wolfe regarded him blandly. "Inspector, we always talk, you merely raise your voice while doing it." Kramer ignored that and pointed at Halverson. "Your museum is a circus." Halverson's jaw tightened. "It's being made one." Wolfe waved a hand. "Sit, all of you. This is not a social call. It is a reconstruction." Kim Rayner sat on the sofa edge as if ready to spring. Lila Hart took the red leather chair with reluctant authority. Rena stood until Wolfe's gaze landed on her. Then she sat stiffly. Halverson stayed near the door until Saul shifted a fraction and reminded him that doors belong to people who can defend them. Kramer remained standing because he thinks standing makes him taller than Wolfe. It doesn't, Wolfe folded his hands. We have been presented with 3 conspicuous elements: an unlocked service door, a 12-minute camera loop, and a corpse positioned near a vault corridor. These elements were designed to produce a conclusion. Kramer snapped. That security screwed up. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes, that is the conclusion intended, and therefore it is false. Halverson exhaled through his nose. Lila Hart stared at Wolfe as if hoping he could say the word fix and make it real. Wolfe continued, "We have also been presented with a fourth element, a letter ostensibly authored by Dr. Lionel Brand, declaring that an incoming collection associated with Mr. Van Wyck is counterfeit. That letter was found in a briefcase that was found in a locker that was helpfully left unlocked." Kim Rayner's mouth tightened. "Planted." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Planted as a lie with handles." Kramer barked. "So what? Somebody plants a letter. Somebody kills an appraiser. Where's your big picture?" Wolfe's gaze held him. "The big picture is motive. The motive is not art. It is governance." Lila Hart's voice came low. "Control of the board." Wolfe nodded once. "Yes, the museum's future was to be steered by chaos. Dr. Brand's death was necessary, because Dr. Brand threatened to deliver an unsanctioned verdict, privately, to you." Lila's hands tightened. "He wanted to warn me." Wolfe's tone was dry. "He wanted to change tomorrow's vote. That is more dangerous than warning you." Halverson said, bitter. "So they killed him before he could speak." "Exactly," Wolfe replied. "The murder was delivered before testimony. The 12-minute loop and the false water leak call were not cover for an opportunistic crime. They were a schedule opened for a single purpose: remove Brand, stage the scene, and leave the door unlocked to receive the blame." Kramer's face tightened. "And the fire alarm?" Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "A corrective. When Director Hart announced a lockdown, our adversary lost his easy movement. Therefore, he triggered an alarm to force movement back into the building, to restore confusion and reopen opportunities." Rena spoke tight. "The pull station was in the south corridor, same zone as the door." Wolfe nodded. "Not coincidence, emphasis." Kim Rayner leaned forward, and the altered tags. Wolfe turned his gaze to her. "A second stage. Once Brand was dead, the killer began manufacturing a false reality. Inventory tags were edited to support the counterfeit story. A forged letter was planted to supply authority. These are edits, made in the dark, meant to become facts by repetition." Kim's eyes flashed. "Summoning is changing the museum's records to make a lie look like history." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Yes, museums are vulnerable to that because they are built on documents." Halverson's voice was flat. "So who benefits?" Wolfe's eyes drifted slow from face to face. Then he said, "Mr. Van Wyck." Kramer snorted. "The donor? Why would he poison his own name with a counterfeit letter?" Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Because you are assuming the letter's purpose is to destroy him. It is not. It is to empower him." Lila Hart's chin lifted. "How?" Wolfe leaned back, patient, as if explaining arithmetic to someone who insists 2 + 2 depends on the lighting. "Consider the board meeting. Consider the acquisition and the donations. Consider the delicate balance of pride and money. Now insert fear." He held up a thick finger. "If the collection is believed counterfeit, the museum must respond instantly, postpone the vote, cancel the gala, distance itself from liability, and, most importantly, seek a rescuer who can stabilize reputation and finances, who is positioned to offer rescue." Kramer's eyes narrowed, despite himself. "Van Wyck." "Yes," Wolfe said. "The donor with influence, resources, and a pre-existing claim on virtue. He can offer emergency funding, legal assistance, a clean appraisal, or a revised deal, on terms favorable to himself." Kim Rayner's voice came sharp. "He can reshape the board." Wolfe nodded. "Correct. A board in panic accepts the first plausible solution from the richest voice in the room." Halverson's jaw tightened. "And the acquisition vote?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Delay is power. A delayed vote allows renegotiation. It allows pressure. It allows alternate valuations. It allows the donor to dictate terms, and, if desired, seize assets cheaply, either through a forced sale, a revised loan, or an emergency transfer for safekeeping." Lila Hart's face tightened. "You think he wanted to get the museum's purchase at a discount?" Or prevent it, Wolfe replied. Or force it into a form that benefits him. The precise shape matters less than the fact that fear is the lever. Kramer barked. All right, even if Van Wyck benefits. He didn't loop cameras himself. Wolfe's gaze turned colder. Number he purchased capability. He nodded to me. I pulled my notes from my pocket and handed them over. Wolfe glanced at them, then looked at Rena Klein. Miss Klein, Wolfe said, your contractor, Mr. Miles Harker, has access to the DVR system. Rena's jaw set. Yes. And he is vulnerable, Wolfe added. Money and fear are persuasive. Rena's eyes narrowed. He's been acting nervous all night. Wolfe nodded. Because he knows the difference between manipulation and murder, and he has crossed it. Kramer swore. So the tech looped the cameras. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Yes, he loaded a loop file and ran an override to disguise it as a glitch. He also enabled the lock override to create the impression that Mr. Halverson's credentials were used. Halverson's mouth tightened. To frame me. To scapegoat you, Wolfe corrected. A scapegoat is not always the final culprit. Sometimes it is merely the first convenient corpse that still breathes, Kim Raynor said. And Walter Sills. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Mr. Sills is operations. He is doors and schedules and access. He is the man who can turn a museum's routine into a weapon. Reiner's voice came tight. He was at the security suite during the alarm. He looked ready. Wolfe nodded once. Because he was monitoring the tool, Mr. Rook, the night supervisor. Wolfe's mouth tightened in faint contempt. A tool, master keys, corridor control. A man who can be pushed with threats and flattered with importance. Halverson's voice hardened. Rook is solid. He's been here 10 years. Wolfe's eyes turned icy. 10 years of being overlooked makes a man hungry. Hunger makes men obedient to anyone who offers them significance. Kim Raynor's hands clenched. He tried to get to the south corridor during the alarm, I said. With master keys. Kramer stared. And you didn't arrest him? Wolfe looked at him. Not yet. Tools are most useful when they still believe they are being used wisely. Kramer growled. You're playing games. Wolfe's tone was mild. Inspector criminals have played games with corpses. I am merely changing the rules. He leaned forward slightly, and the room quieted the way it does when Wolfe's intelligence decides to step closer. The scheme, Wolfe said, has a shape. It begins with a manufactured breach. An unlocked service door meant to be discovered and blamed. It proceeds with a purchased window, 12 minutes of looped cameras, and a lured guard. Within that window, Dr. Brand is killed and staged to shout, intruder and vault. That staging points the police away from the true motive, a verdict that would have shifted the board's power. Brand would have told me the truth. Yes, Wolfe said, and truth would have ruined the plan. He lifted another finger. Next, a false verdict is inserted, Brand's letter, to poison reputation and steer tomorrow's meeting. Meanwhile, inventory tags are altered to make the poison look confirmed by internal records. Finally, when you attempted to deny further manipulation by ordering a lockdown, a fire alarm was triggered to restore confusion and reopen access. Rena's voice came low, and the service door was unlocked again during the evacuation. Wolfe nodded. Because the unlocked door is the signal. It tells the participants, particularly the tool, that the staged riot has begun. It tells them that normal rules are suspended, that chaos is authorized. It also tells the investigators, if they are lazy, that they have found their culprit. Kramer's face reddened. I'm not lazy. Wolfe looked at him. Number, you are merely impatient. It is nearly as dangerous. The room was silent except for the storm tickling the windows. Then Kim Raynor said, very quietly, So who is the hand? Wolfe's eyes moved, slow and deliberate, over the faces present, as if tasting the air for one specific scent. The hand, Wolfe said, is the person who benefits most from controlling the board's fear, who can purchase technical interference, who can coerce operations, and who has motive to silence an appraiser before he speaks privately to the director. Kramer snapped. You mean Van Wyck? Wolfe did not confirm it outright. Wolfe rarely does until he has the last nail ready. He simply said, Tomorrow morning the Marlowe Museum's board meeting will proceed, but not as planned. Lila Hart's head jerked. What do you mean? Wolfe's voice was smooth and final. I mean we will hold our own meeting here, in this office, with all necessary parties present, and with the police positioned to do something useful for once. Kramer bristled. Like hell. Wolfe's gaze pinned him. Inspector, if you wish to arrest the correct people rather than merely the convenient ones, you will attend. You will also bring a stenographer. I intend that the truth be recorded. Halverson's jaw tightened. How do you get them here? Wolfe's mouth curved faintly. By offering them what they cannot resist. A chance to control the narrative before it escapes them. I felt it then. The hook at the end of the line. Wolfe wasn't just reconstructing. He was setting a stage of his own. And the last thing he said, as Fritz appeared quietly in the doorway, with the expression that means dinner is waiting, and criminal plots are not invited to it, was delivered in the calm tone Wolfe uses, when he has already won, and is merely waiting for the other side to arrive. Mr. Goodwin, he said, tomorrow we will see who panics when the verdict is removed from their hands. That was the hook, neat and sharp, because panic, in my experience, always shows up on time, especially when someone has been selling schedules. Chapter 10. Wolfe hates museums for the same reason he hates politics. Too many people trying to turn opinion into law with nothing sturdier than paper. But he loves one thing about both. If you control the room, you control the story. And Wolfe, when he is at his best, controls rooms the way an organ controls air. By 10 o'clock the next morning, grey light, slushy streets, the city tired of its own winter. Wolfe's office was arranged like a courtroom that had been denied robes, chairs set. Wolfe in his own chair behind his desk, settled like a judge who had already read the verdict and was only waiting for the defendants to sit down and pretend they might argue. Kramer arrived first, of course, because he can't resist the opportunity to be present when Wolfe is about to humiliate someone. He brought 2 detectives in plain clothes and a uniform in the hallway, because even Kramer understands punctuation requires backup. Director Lila Hart came next, composed but brittle. Boyd Halverson followed, hard-eyed, carrying a folder that looked heavy with logs and regret. Rena Klein arrived with Kim Rayner, who had slept as little as I had and looked like she could stab a forged tag through someone's hand. Walter Sills came in last among the museum staff, neat suit, controlled face, eyes that kept making quick inventory of doors and people. Grant Van Wyck arrived, as if he were doing us a favor by permitting us to exist. He brought cologne, a lawyer's smile, and a winter coat that cost more than my furniture. Miles Harker trailed behind him. That alone was a confession with shoes on. Miles looked grey and small, eyes darting, hands restless. Van Wyck didn't look at him the way a man looks at a colleague. He looked at him the way a man looks at a receipt he might need to shred. Wolfe let them all settle. He made no speech. He did not welcome anyone. He simply began, as if the universe owed him silence. Mr. Van Wyck, Wolfe said, you will be pleased to learn that the museum board vote will occur this morning. Lila Hart's head snapped up. It will? Wolfe continued smoothly. Yes, not at the museum. Here, Director Hart has agreed to a remote emergency quorum. It will proceed in 30 minutes. The agenda includes the acquisition vote and, most notably, a motion to suspend donations and seize custody of all items offered by your foundation pending authenticity review. The air changed. Grant Van Wyck's smile held for one breath too long. Then it tightened. Seize custody. Wolfe's eyes half-lidded. A precaution. A prudent board does not permit potentially counterfeit material to remain under donor control. Van Wyck's voice stayed polite, but his eyes went sharp. My collection is not counterfeit. Perhaps not, Wolfe replied. Yet you have been made to appear so by a letter allegedly authored by Dr. Brand. Boards respond to appearance. That is their nature. Van Wyck's jaw worked, His gaze slid, just once, quick, to Miles Harker. Miles swallowed hard. Wolfe watched both of them with the calm patience of a man watching a trap settle into place. And, Wolfe added, Inspector Kramer has obtained a warrant to open the museum's security server cabinet and seize the DVR drives and access logs immediately after the vote to preserve evidence. Kramer grunted. We're taking it all. Walter Sills stiffened. Miles looked as if someone had tightened a rope around his ribs. Van Wyck's polite mask thinned. This is outrageous. Wolfe's tone was mild. So is murder. He leaned back a fraction. We will wait in the interim. You may speak among yourselves. I advise against telephoning anyone. Mr. Panzer is observant. Saul Panzer, standing near the door, said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was its own threat. Wolfe turned his gaze to his desk, as if the matter were settled. He had done the only thing he needed to do. He had presented Van Wyck with the one prospect a man like Van Wyck cannot tolerate: loss of control over assets and narrative at the same time. I sat at my desk and watched the room the way a cat watches a mouse hole. Sure enough, the mouse twitched. Miles Harker's hands began to fidget more aggressively. Van Wyck murmured something to him, low and tight. Miles nodded. Too fast. Walter Sills shifted in his chair, eyes flicking toward the hallway, as if he could see the museum's doors from West 35th Street. Then Van Wyck rose. I won't sit here and be insulted, he said. Wolfe didn't look up. Sit, Mr. Van Wyck. Van Wyck's smile returned, brittle. Or what? Wolfe lifted his eyes at last, and they were cold. Or you will reveal yourself. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Van Wyck moved toward the door anyway, and Miles Harker rose with him like a shadow that had been paid. Kramer barked. Hey, where do you think you're going? Van Wyck said. To consult my counsel. Wolfe's voice cut through, calm and exact. Mr. Harker will instead return to the museum and unlock the South Service door. The words hit like a slap. Miles froze mid-step, eyes wide. Van Wyck stopped too, not because Wolfe commanded him. Men like Van Wyck don't obey words, but because Wolfe had just named his move before it happened. That is the one form of power that money cannot purchase. Miles stammered. I don't. Wolfe's voice stayed steady. You do. You will go to the museum. You will access the security suite. You will retrieve and destroy the loop file and the override log that proves you loaded it. You will do so by using the confusion of a staged access event, an unlocked service door, exactly as you did before. Miles's face collapsed. He looked at Van Wyck as if begging for denial. Van Wyck gave him none. Walter Sills's mouth tightened. His eyes darted to Van Wyck, then away, like a tool waiting for the hand's next signal. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. You see, Inspector, I said the door would confess. Twice. Unlocked is not negligence. It is intent made visible. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You set this up? Wolfe's gaze held him. Of course. There is no board vote. There is no remote quorum. There is only a prospect designed to provoke haste. Van Wyck's mask finally cracked. You, yes. Wolfe said. I lied. A lie used to expose a liar is a lesser offense. Kramer growled. That's not how. Wolfe cut him off. Inspector, watch. Van Wyck's eyes hardened. He made a small motion with his hand. Subtle, practiced. Walter Sills shifted in response. Miles flinched as if pulled by a string. And then Miles did the one thing Wolfe had predicted. He bolted. He ran for the front door like a man fleeing a fire alarm. Except this time the alarm was in Wolfe's voice. I was already moving. I hit the hall first, because my legs have earned their keep. Saul was beside me like a shadow with purpose. Fritz, somewhere upstairs, would later claim he heard raised voices and did not approve. Miles got the door open. Cold air rushed in. On the stoop, a man stood waiting. Walter Sills. He had slipped out during Wolfe's interim, as if for air. He had been positioned. Sills held a key ring and looked up as Miles burst out. "Go," Sills hissed. Miles stumbled toward him. I hit the stoop, just as Saul reached across and caught Sills's wrist. Sills jerked, startled, and the key ring flashed in the grey light. Kramer's detectives surged behind us, fast and eager now that Wolfe's prediction had turned into evidence with legs. Sills tried to wrench free. "You don't." Saul's voice was quiet and deadly. "Stop." Sills stopped. Tools stop when held by the right hand. Miles froze too, breathing hard, eyes wild. "I didn't kill him," he blurted, as if the air itself demanded confession. Kramer appeared on the stoop like an angry bulldog in a wet coat. He saw the keys, saw Miles, saw Sills, and his face lit with ugly satisfaction. "Cuffs," he snapped. "Men like him don't run until the last moment, because they believe the world will move out of their way." Kramer turned and jabbed a finger at him. "And you, Donner boy, you're coming too." Van Wyck's voice went sharp. "This is outrageous, I demand." Wolfe's voice came from the office doorway behind him, calm and final. "Demand whatever you please, Mr. Van Wyck. The door has already answered." Kramer cuffed Miles first, then Sills because it's always best to secure the tools before addressing the hand. Then he stepped toward Van Wyck, and for once Van Wyck's money did not create space. The detectives closed in. Van Wyck's shoulders stiffened. "You have nothing." Wolfe's eyes were cold. "On the contrary, we have intent made visible." The same door unlocked twice in the same manner, each time synchronized with manufactured confusion. The loop file, the override, the altered tags, the forged letter, the bribe at the diner, and your attempt to destroy evidence when you believed control was slipping. He paused, letting the words settle like dust. "Negligence," Wolfe said, "does not repeat with precision. Intent does." Van Wyck's face finally crumpled, not into sorrow, but into calculation too late. Kramer hauled him forward. "Tell it to the judge." As they took them down the steps and into the grey, dripping morning, I stood on the stoop with Saul and watched the street. The slush, the taxis, the city pretending nothing mattered beyond the next light. Back inside, Wolfe returned to his chair with the satisfied weariness of a man who has restored order to a room full of disorderly egos. Fritz appeared, murmured about coffee, and vanished again to defend civilization in the kitchen. Wolfe looked at me. "Archie?" "Yes." Wolfe's voice softened just enough to be human. "You see now why I despise the word always." I rubbed my cheekbone, which still remembered the tree lot from another life. "Because the first time you believe always, someone buys 12 minutes and uses them to kill a man." Wolfe nodded once, precisely. I said, "And because twice unlocked isn't carelessness, it's a confession." Wolfe's eyes narrowed in approval. Yes, intent made visible. Outside, the storm had finally stopped. New York went on, as it does, stepping around the truth as if it were merely another patch of slush. Inside, Wolfe reached for his book as if the world had at last become tolerable again. And for the first time in 2 days, the front door stayed locked because it wanted to, not because someone was trying to make it tell a lie.